The government says it won't bring in official vaccine passports, but that's not stopping businesses and organizations from creating their own. What does this mean for those who don't want to get vaccinated? In particular, what does it mean for our ethnic communities, who we know are much more vaccine hesitant? I'm joined by Trevor Phillips, Times columnist, former chair of the Equalities Commission and itinerant writer for The Spectator, and Rod Liddle, a Spectator columnist. Welcome to you both. Rod, you wrote about vaccine passports this week. I still wasn't sure in the end if you were for or against them.
No, I'm not sure either, to be honest. What I was talking about...
So I read that right then.
You got it right, Andrew. I was looking at what the government was trying to do and why they had moved away in the last couple of weeks from the idea of a mandatory vaccine passport. And it occurred to me that it was going to be in trouble simply through grounds of discrimination, that we would be in a position where large quantities of our British black ethnic minority people are reluctant to have the vaccine, and that would see them excluded from a whole manner of things, such as cinemas, such as possibly transport, such as restaurants, such as pubs, and so on. And I think the government thought it would be rather better if business took the brunt for that particular problem rather than themselves. That was my worry.
And you raised that about Alabama in the segregation South before the civil rights in the 60s. And but I wonder if is that a fair comparison? I mean, for example, if I'm the bus driver in Montgomery, Alabama, I don't let you onto my bus because you're black. There's nothing you can do about the color of your skin. If I'm a restaurant owner, I'm not letting you in, whatever your color, because you haven't got a vaccine passport. You can change that.
No, sure.
Get one.
Sure, Andrew. And I was being a little bit facetious, but nonetheless...
I got that bit too, Rod.
That's what you probably think. There are many in the black and ethnic minority community who would say that it amounts to pretty much the same thing and would argue strongly that the reason for lack of take-up, and I'm sure Trevor knows more about this than I do, that one of the reasons for the lack of take-up is because, and this has been quoted in the United States on vaccination programs before now, historic injustice at the hands of the health service for black and ethnic minority people. So in the end, the chap on the bus, it's effectively the same, if not quite as brutal.
Okay, Trevor, what do you make of this?
Well, I read Rod's piece, and one thing you can say about Rod's journalism is never knowingly undercooked. I think he's taking it to some wild places. But there is a basic and an important point that he raises here. I think the answer, if you're asking specifically about the issue of what Rod describes as mandatory vaccine passports, well, there are two elements to that. Mandatory? No, I don't think so. I think that gets us into very difficult territory. How do you police it? How do you qualify it? All that stuff. But vaccine passports that demonstrate that you've had it in the same way as you do for yellow fever, if you're going to certain countries and so on, I don't see any problem with that at all. I think actually that would be to everybody's advantage. And today we can do that pretty simply by putting an app on your phone. So I'm completely up for that. And I don't really see that there's any necessary probability of discrimination in that. I think that there's a bigger problem behind this, which is that, if I can put it bluntly, neither the government or anybody else really knows what they're talking about on this. We're hearing a lot about, we know that there is vaccine reluctance. Well, what we've got is some opinion polls that tell us that, but we don't know that actually people from minorities are taking it up in less frequently than others. I've had my own vaccine, by the way, given to me by a Chinese nurse who really made me feel, she said to her mate, I don't check this guy because I don't think he's old enough to have it. So it made me feel rather good about it. And I suspect that's going on all around the health service.
So you had to pay
I think that there's vaccine. A lot of nonsense talk. If you look at the NHS data.
You paid the Chinese nurse for the vaccine, I can see.
Not at all. She was lovely. I think there's a lot of nonsense being talked. There's a lot of nonsense being talked. So, for example, it's routinely said that ethnic minorities are more likely to die. If you look at the ONS data, week by week from April last year, the split between white and non-white has been 86-14, 86%, 14%, absolutely steadily every single week. And as you will know, that is the split in the population as a whole. Now, it may be that some minority groups are dying at a greater rate, but that's probably balanced by those who are less likely to die. It may also be that minorities are more likely to become infected, but because they have a younger age profile, less likely to die. The problem is we do not know. If I can point the finger at government, they have been absolutely scandalously lax in trying to understand the dynamics of this issue. And they have got many things absolutely wrong on this question.
I take issue with one thing that Trevor says there, which is the lack of data on black and ethnic minorities taking up the vaccine. There is quite a bit of data. It's sporadic. I quote a couple in the piece I was writing. One is from, I think, North Staffordshire, where, and I think this was largely Bangladeshi patients to GP surgeries were 10 times less likely to take up the vaccine than were their white neighbours. And there was a similar study, I think the government's own figures have also suggested that amongst African and British Caribbean people, the take-up is somewhere in the region of 50% as opposed to round about just over 80% for white people. So I think there is a difference there. But I think underneath that difference, I don't think it's as simple as, I think socioeconomics come into it. In some cases, in some parts of our Muslim community, I was talking to Mohammed Abbasi, the leader of the Association of British Muslims today, and the various Muslim groups have done an enormous amount to make sure that the Muslim community is taking up their vaccine. But there's still some worry in some parts, particularly amongst Bangladeshis, that the vaccine might have some contaminatory pig stuff in it, something like that. There's still that slight resistance there. So there's loads and loads of different reasons why, and I think most of them are socioeconomic, why black and ethnic minority people may not be taking up the vaccine.
Let me go back to Trevor. Trevor. No, let's see if we can re-establish contact with Trevor, and we'll get back to him. He does seem to have frozen. Rod, let me come back to you just for a second. So it seems that I think you and Trevor both agree that there shouldn't be mandatory sort of government-endorsed passports, vaccine passports. But what about the private sector? Putting aside your sort of Alabama analogy. I see Trevor's back with us. I'll come to him in a minute. Let me finish this question. I mean, for example, suppose we hope, it's maybe a long shot, we might this summer be able to do our famous Spectator summer party. Now, you know it well. It's usually in a steamy July night. People are crammed in they're outdoors, but it's pretty crammed in. There's not much social distancing. If we were to say to people, you're welcome to come to our summer party, we're managing to do it this year, but you have to have a vaccine passport, what would be wrong with that?
I don't see that anything would be wrong with it. I'm with Trevor on that. But the problem is how it's perceived. And there will be people who try to whip up the cause of discrimination. And they will say that it's simply discriminating, firstly, in favour of the affluent, because we know as well, the affluent and the elderly are the two tranches of the population who are most likely to take up the vaccine. So that wouldn't particularly hurt the Spectator summer party, as it's comprised largely of the affluent and the elderly.
It's full of young folks. It's a multiracial event too.
Yes, you're quite right. But I think in the broader world, some people will find a problem with that.
Okay, let me come back to Trevor. I'm delighted we've established contact again. You wanted to reply there to Rod, particularly on the data. Let's come back to that and tell us what we know.
Let me say, I think there is some thing going on, but the problem is we do not know. By the way, on the question you've just been discussing, the truth of the matter is, why are you going to pay any attention to any idiot who thinks that the possibility of discrimination is a bigger deal than the fact that black people might actually die from this thing? I mean, frankly, I don't think we need to be bothered with those people. Our problem, the problem that we've got at the moment is that there are lots of things we do not actually know to be true. We need the data for this reason, to understand what it is that is going wrong. I do not believe that, for example, the problem is language proficiency. Fewer than 2% of people in this country cannot read or understand English well enough to understand the messages that are coming forward. Nor do I think there is some craziness about what's going on in the internet. We can't one day be complaining about digital exclusion of minorities and then say they're not turning up because they're all busy on Twitter imbibing the conspiracy theories. That's all nonsense. I think there are probably 2 or 3 things we need to look at. First of all, historic mistrust of authority. I think Rod's got that right. Secondly, I think we need to look at where vaccinations are taking place. In the United States, they've shown in Massachusetts that on average, vaccination centres, white people are twice as likely to live within a mile of a vaccination centre as black people. And that's part of the example. And the third thing, which nobody wants to talk about, but is a real thing, is that we need to think about people who may be undocumented and who are not coming forward because what they believe is any contact with the authorities of this kind will turn the eye of Sauron, the immigration authorities, on them, and that actually they may get a jab, but the next week they'll be out of the country. And that's the thing that we've got to try and deal with. Give those people confidence that the system isn't going to lead to them being targeted by immigration authorities.
I'm interested, though, Trevor, that you say that the figures are not as clear-cut as some of the coverage has been, that we need to be careful in talking about the uptake being that different from the rest of the population.
Well, the narrative has overcome any regard for data. And as you know, Andrew, my business is now data scientist, and I can't tell you how furious I mean, to take Rod's point, I understand why he believes that, but I can tell you for certain we'll publish a paper on this probably in the next 3 or 4 weeks. There is one large local authority. We've run the records of about 1 million patients, and what we know is that there are about 500,000 records in that authority, which has a couple of million people in it, which have no ethnicity data on them. So the data on which the NHS is working, it has a huge margin of error. There's loads of things we do not know, but people are asserting confidently. And unfortunately, that will probably mean that we're probably making mistakes, taking the wrong steps, and ignoring, for example, very small groups who need some special treatment.
That's fascinating. Rod, I'll give you a final word on this.
I think the fascinating thing is the take-up of the vaccine in Europe. It seems to me almost certain that one of the reasons for the very high take-up in the UK is the fact that it's a bit of patriotism in there. There's a bit of good news story that we were developing the vaccine and have done better than the rest of Europe in getting it out. And I think that's rather swung more people than were expected behind the vaccine. But it's also fascinating to look at the various reasons in Europe, particularly amongst countries which suffered under totalitarian governments. The Visegrad countries, where take-up is very low. East Germany, where take-up is a lot lower than it is in West Germany. But Germany, again, as another example, they had a much hated vaccination program from 1874, compulsory for smallpox, and it did wonders. It eradicated smallpox from Germany. But it was very unpopular, particularly under the Weimar government, because of the side effects and some children dying in schools as a consequence of this. It was all carried out in schools. So there's a long historical memory of compulsory vaccination and a big government bearing down upon people. And that's one reason why the take-up's so low. Another reason, I think, could be the obverse to what I was saying about Britain, that in Europe they have mishandled the vaccine appallingly. It has been slow, sluggish under the EU, and I suspect that has its effect upon what people think about the vaccine in the end. It's a fascinating topic.
I think Rod's got a really important point there. We talk about minorities and we constantly are thinking about people of colour. Let's bear in mind we have at least nearly 1 million people from Poland in this country, plus from other East European countries, many of whom have parents and grandparents who lived under authoritarian regimes who frankly could not be trusted. And it's not surprising if some of that, if you like, memory would discourage them from trusting any authority, even in this country, that says, oh, come, don't worry, we're going to look after you. Because frankly, behind the Iron Curtain, for the best part of 70 years, we're going to look after you, meant you weren't coming back home.
Gentlemen, we'll leave it there. Thank you for joining me on Spectator TV, Rod and Trevor there.